Hello, thank you for listening to Amsco Chapter 4. Uh, so, a couple things, guys. Um, I'll be going through the notes. The things I'm actually going to read through, though, rather than going through every single part of these, is just these key concepts, because these key concepts are essential for you to being able to understand the exam. I'll give you some commentary on some of these things that are important. But let's go over our first key concept. British imperial attempts to reassert control over its colonies and the colonial reaction to the attempts to produce a new American republic. All right, so basically what this is saying is what Great Britain is doing to put control over America, or I guess you could say the soon-to-be American republic, to put more control, to put restrictions, and how Americans respond to that, or the colonists respond to that, and just some of the struggles of the New World. Right, so that's the first key concept we're going to go over. But I just want to go ahead and get to it right away. So let's begin. You want to note the dates. Period 4, 1754 to 1774, right before the American Revolution. What caused American colonists in the 1760s to become, as John Adams expressed it, more attentive to their liberties? The chief reason for their discontent in these years was a dramatic change in Britain's colonial policy. Britain began to assert its more power in the colonies, collect taxes, and enforce trade laws much more aggressively than in the past. To explain why Britain took this fateful step, we must study the effects of its various wars for empire. All in all, what you understand is this paragraph is saying that Britain is taxing more, and here's why. Empires at war. Late in the 17th century, war broke out involving Great Britain, France, and Spain. This was the first set of a series of 4 wars that were worldwide in scope, with battles in Europe, India, and North America. These wars occurred intermittently over a 74 period from 1689 to 1770 or 1763. The stakes were high, since the winner of the struggle stood to gain supremacy in the West Indies and Canada and dominate lucrative colonial trade. So, over 75 years, you're getting a lot of wars between Great Britain, France, and Spain. This is happening worldwide in all their different colonies. This is important because whoever won would have the most important trade routes. So, Britain is getting broke because of these wars. The first 3 wars. The first 3 wars were named after British king or queen under whose reign they occurred. In both King William's War and Queen Anne's War, the British launched expeditions to capture Quebec, but their efforts failed. American Indians supported by the French burned British frontier settlements. Ultimately, the British forces prevailed in Queen Anne's War and gained both Nova Scotia from France and trading rights in Spanish America. So what you're seeing here is Queen Anne, King William's War. What you want to understand through this is just the French and British conflict. A third war fought during the reign of George II, King George's War. Once again, the British colonies were under attack from their perennial rivals, the French and the Spanish. In Georgia, James Oglethorpe led a colonial army that managed to repulse Spanish attacks. To the north, a force of New Englanders captured Louisburg, a major French fortress on Cape Breton Island, controlling access to the St. Lawrence River. In the peace treaty ending the war, however, Britain agreed to give Louisburg back to the French in exchange for political and economic gains in India. New Englanders were furious about the loss of a fort they had fought so hard to win. So, what you understand, these wars are also expanding to the Americas. With these wars, you're getting some successes against the Spanish. However, you're also getting some conflict with the French. This is the most important war that you need to know. Those previous wars kind of set the context. It's nice to name drop those, but the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, is a must. The first 3 wars between Britain and France focused primarily on battles in Europe, only secondarily in conflict in the colonies. The Europeans saw little value in committing regular troops to America. However, in the fourth and final war in the series, the fighting began and the colonies spread to Europe. Moreover, Britain and France now recognized the full importance of their colonies and shipped large number of troops of overseas to North America rather than rely on amateur colonial forces. This fourth and most decisive war was known as the 7 Years' War. The North American phase of the war is often called the French and Indian War. So you want to make sure you understand with this is that the French and Indian War is very important, specifically because the colonists are now sent, or the Europeans are now sending European troops to the colonies to fight and expand the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War. The beginning of the war. From the British point of view, the French provoked the war by building a chain of forts in the Ohio River Valley. One of the reasons the French did so was to halt the westward expansion of the British colonies, hoping to stop the French from completing the work on Fort Duquesne, which is Pittsburgh, and thereby win control of the Ohio River Valley. The governor of Virginia sent a small militia under the command of a young colonel named George Washington. After gaining a small initial victory, Washington's troops surrendered to a superior force of Frenchmen and their American Indian allies on July 3rd, 1754. With this military encounter in the wilderness, the final war of the empire began. So remember, this is Washington's fail. He he loses, he snitches, he's not successful. He sends those letters to his broham, hey bro, like everything's going well, but then he ends up losing to the French. And the reason for this was westward expansion. Remember, the French had much of the Ohio River Valley. The British wanted to move westward. Not going to happen. Um, at the First War, the First War went badly for the British. In 1755, another expedition from Virginia, led by General Edward Braddock, ended up in disastrous defeat as more than 2,000 British regulars and colonial troops were routed by a small force of French and American Indians near Fort Duquesne. The Algonquin allies of the French ravaged the frontier of western Pennsylvania and North Carolina. The French repulsed a British invasion of French Canada that began in 1756. So, through that paragraph, you're seeing some of the successes and failures of Great Britain. Mostly failure. The Albany Plan of Union. Recognizing the need for coordinating colonial defense, the British government called for representatives from several colonies to meet in Congress in 1754. The delegates from 7 colonies adopted a plan, the Albany Plan of Union, developed by Benjamin Franklin, that provided for an intercolonial government and a system for recruiting troops and collecting taxes from the various colonies for their common defense. Each colony was too jealous of its own taxation and powers to accept the plan. However, it never took effect. The Albany Congress is significant, however, because it set the precedent for later, more revolutionary Congresses in 1770s. So, the Albany Plan of Union is a vocabulary word that you want to make sure that you know. Very important. This plan is a fail. It calls for the different colonies to kind of organize together to be able to fight back the French. However, they're not able to organize together specifically because those colonies had too much of an ego. But this is important because it sets the precedent for colonies meeting together, which is going to happen once we get to the American Revolution. British victory. The British Prime Minister William Pitt concentrated the government's military strategy on conquering Canada. The objective was accomplished with retaking Louisbourg in 1758. The surrender to go back to General James Wolfe in 1759, the taking of Montreal in 1760. After these British victories, the European powers negotiated a peace treaty in 1763. Great Britain acquired both French Canada and Spanish Florida. France ceded, gave up to Spain its huge western territory. Louisiana claims of the Mississippi River in compensation for Spain's loss of Florida. With this treaty, the British extended control of North America. The French power on the continent virtually ended. So, big picture you want to understand is Great Britain is now really expanding in North America. The French and the Spanish are kind of losing their territory, or they are losing their territory. You need to know the immediate effects of the war. Britain's victory in the 7 Years' War gave them unchallenged supremacy in North America and also established them as a dominant naval power to the world. So, they're getting a stronger navy, they have more geographic land. No longer did the American colonies face the threat of concerted attacks from the French, Spanish, and American Indian allies. More important to the colonies, though, was a change of how the British and colonists viewed each other. So immediate effects is there's going to be more conflict between the colonists and the British because, hey, that war was expensive. But you also want to understand is now what you're seeing is the French and the Spanish, they're kind of seeing their way out of America, and Great Britain is becoming more powerful. They're not completely out yet. There's going to be more conflict, but British obviously have the upper hand. The British view. The British came away from the war with a low opinion of the colonial military abilities. They're basically saying, hey, colonists, we did all the work, y'all suck. They held the American militia in contempt as a poorly trained, disorderly rabble. Furthermore, they noted that some of the colonies that refused to contribute either troops or money to the war effort. Social loafers. They're saying, hey, y'all slacking, like literally we did most of the work. Most British were convinced that the colonists were incapable and unwilling to defend their new frontiers and vastly expand the West empire, the British Empire. So because you guys suck at war so much, we're going to keep our borders the way they are. If we move westward, the Native Americans going to kick your butt. The colonial view. The colonists took an opposite view of their military performance. They were proud of their record in all four wars and developed confidence that they could successfully provide for their own defense. They were not impressed with British troops nor their leaderships, so vice versa. They see this as we did most of the work. This is colonial lives. We should be given the right to expand westward, the right to govern ourselves. So next thing we get is a reorganization of the British Empire. More serious than the resentful feelings stirred by war experience was the British government's shift in colonial policies. Previously, Britain had exercised little control over the colonies and had generally allowed its navigation laws regulating colonial trades to go unenforced. The earlier policy of salutary neglect was abandoned by the British, adopting more forceful policies for taking control of their expanded North American dominions. So prior to this, remember, the colonies, they were with the Navigation Acts, they should not be allowed to trade with the French, the Spanish. It had to be with the British. All trade had to leave through like British merchant boats. A lot of restrictions, but they were never enforced. This is going to change. All four wars, and the last one in particular, have been extremely costly. In addition, Britain now felt the need to maintain a large British military force to guard its American frontiers. American British landowners' pressure was building to reduce heavy taxes the colonial wars laid upon them. To pay for troops to guard the frontier without increasing taxes at home, King George III and the dominant party in Parliament, the Whigs, wanted the American colonies to bear more of the cost of maintaining the British Empire. So rather than making the people in England pay, he wants to make the colonists pay, right, for the war. Because if he's going to make the colonists pay the people in England pay, they're more directly able to rebel and cause conflict with Parliament, right? So we get a couple things. Pontiac's rebellion is one thing you want to know. The first major test of the new British imperial policy came in 1763, when Chief Pontiac led a major attack against colonial settlements in the western frontier. The American Indians were angered by the growing westward movement of European settlers on their land, and by the British refusal to offer gifts as the French had done. Pontiac's alliance with the American Indians in the Ohio River Valley destroyed forts and settlements from New York to Virginia. Rather than relying on colonial forces to retaliate, the British sent regular British troops to put down the uprising. So we're getting Pontiac's rebellion. Pontiac, Native American. Of course, you're looking at the Chief Pontiac, right? But anyways, his tribe is very upset that the British, they're stingy in terms of trade. They don't offer gifts, and they keep encroaching the land, right? The colonists do. Well, the colonists don't do anything because they can't do anything about it. I mean, they could, but they're not necessarily the most militaristic union at this point. So the British Empire has to come in and stop it, which kind of tells Britain, it reinforces their view that the colonists can't protect themselves. So we get the proclamation of 1763, and this is to prevent Pontiac's rebellion and to prevent more rebellions like that. In an effort to stabilize the western frontier, the British government issued a proclamation that prohibited colonists from settling west of the Appalachian Mountains. The British hoped that limiting the settlements would prevent future hostilities between colonists and American Indians, but the colonists reacted to the proclamation with anger and defiance. After the victory in the 7 Years' War, colonists hoped to reap the benefits in the form of access to western lands. For the British to deny such benefits was infuriating. Defying the prohibition, thousands went westward, right? So in order to prevent conflict with Native American troops, because of course the British, they have to use their troops, Native American tribes, they went ahead and put the proclamation in 1763, which stated colonists cannot move westward past that line, which is the Appalachian Mountains. Colonists are pissed because they need more land, right? They want land, and that's just not going to happen. British actions and colonial reactions. The proclamation in 1763 was the first set of a series of acts by the British government that had angered colonists. From the British point of view, each act was justified as a proper method for protecting its own colonial empire and making the colonies pay their share of costs for such protection. From the colonists' point of view, each act represented an alarming threat to their cherished liberties and long-established practice of representative government. So all in all, what you want to see here is Great Britain, hey, we need to protect our empire. Colonists, well, we want representation. New revenues and regulations. In the first 2 years of peace, King George III's chancellor of the Exchequer or Treasury and a Prime Minister, Lloyd George Grenville, successfully pushed through Parliament 3 measures that aroused colonial suspicions of the British plot to subvert their liberties. So basically saying the King George III and Lord George Grenville, what they're doing is infringing on the civil liberties that the colonists felt that they had, the rights that they felt that they had. First one we'll get is the Sugar Act. The Sugar Act of 1764. This act, also known as the Revenue Act of 1764, placed duties on foreign sugar and certain luxuries. Its chief purpose was to raise money for the crown, and a companion law also provided for strict enforcement of the Navigation Acts. So basically what you want to get is tax on luxury goods and sugar, and also, guess what? You're not going to trade with the French or the Spanish. Those accused of smuggling would be tried at Admiralty Court, and of course, there's no jury. These are all just judges, and the judges would almost rule in favor of the British. The Quarterly Act. This act required the colonists to provide food and living quarters for British soldiers stationed in the colonies. So guess what? Hey, these troops are supposed to protect the colonies, so it is up to the colonies to feed them. They should live in your houses. Heck no, I don't want a lobster back or a redcoat living in my house. Stamp Act. In an effort to raise funds to support British forces in the colonies, Lord Grenville turned to a tax long in use in Britain. The Stamp Act, enacted by Parliament in 1765, required that revenue stamps be placed on most printed papers in the colonies, including all legal documents, newspapers. There's a tax on newspapers and legal documents. More money you got to pay. Also on pamphlets and advertisements. This is the first direct tax collected from those who use the goods paid by the people in colonies, as opposed to the taxes on imported goods, which were paid by merchants. So one thing that you're getting is this is a direct tax on the people. This is the first one. The other ones was paid on imported goods, right? So this is a huge difference. People are going to be upset about this. People in every colony reacted with indignation to views of the Stamp Act. A young Virginia lawyer named Patrick Henry spoke for many when he stood up in House of Burgesses, House of Burghers, as you guys like to say, to demand that the King's government recognized the rights of all citizens, including the right not to be taxed without representation. It's Patrick Henry that says, hey, we're not doing this. We're not represented. In Massachusetts, James Otis initiated a call for cooperative action among the colonies to protest the Stamp Act. Representatives from 9 colonies in New York met in 1765 to form the so-called Stamp Act Congress. They resolved not only their own elected representatives had the legal authority to approve the taxes, so taxation without representation. This was passed in Parliament and not in the town halls or the House of Burgesses. The protest against the Stamp Act took a violent turn with the formation of the Sons and Daughters of Liberty, a secret society organized for the purpose of intimidating tax agents. So key terms, Sons and Daughters of Liberty, they would go ahead and try to intimidate those who were drawing those taxes. Members of the society sometimes destroyed revenue stamps and tarred and feathered revenue officials. Boycotts against British imports were the most effective form of protest. It became fashionable in the colonies in 65 and 66 for people not to purchase any article of British origin. Faced with a sharp drop in trade, London merchants put a pressure on Parliament to repeal the controversial Stamp Act, so boycotts were used. That's the most effective one. Was there violence? Sure. Sons and Daughters of Liberty tarred those tax agents, but the boycotts were the most successful. The next act that you want to make sure you know is the Declaratory Act. The Declaratory Act. In 1766, Grenville was replaced by another prime minister, and the Parliament voted to repeal the Stamp Act. When news of the repeal reached the colonies, people rejoiced. Few colonists at the time noted that Parliament had also enacted a face-saving measure known as the Declaratory Act. This act asserted that Parliament had the right to tax and make laws for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. This declaratory policy would soon lead to renewed conflict between the colonists and the British government. So what they're basically saying in this with the Declaratory Act is, hey, yeah, we repealed the Stamp Act, but guess what? We're passing the Declaratory Act. In the end, we got you, because what we're able to do is we're able to tax whatever we want because we're the British government. Second phase of the crisis, 67 to 73. Second phase of the crisis, 1767 to 1773. Because the British government still needed revenues, the newly appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Treasurer, Charles Townsend, proposed another tax measure. So he's a little cocky, arrogant little boy. He called this the Townsend Acts, naming it after, I believe, himself. the Townsend Acts, adopting Townsend's program in 67, Parliament enacted new duties to be collected on colonial imports on tea, glass, and paper. The law required that revenues raised be used to pay the Crown's officials in the colonies, thus making them independent of the colonial assemblies that had previously paid their salaries. The Townsend Acts also provided for the search of private homes for smuggled goods. Um, all that an official needed was what we called a writ of assistance, a general license to search, rather than the judge's warrant permitting a search only of a specific named property. Another of the Townsend Acts suspended New York's assembly for the colony's defiance of the Quartering Act. So a couple of things he does. And number one, he's saying that guess what? The colonies are the ones that are going to have to pay for the salaries of these royal officials that are enacting all these ridiculous things. Second thing is they're saying, guess what? If you're smuggling all these goods, all we need is a writ of assistance. It's a license, and we can search for all the smuggled goods that you have, take them, and also fine you for it. New York's saying, no, we're not going to do this. And as a result of that, Townsend goes ahead and dissolves their assembly, which means dissolves their government. Right? At first, most colonies accepted taxes under the Townsend Acts because they were indirect, paid by merchants. However, soon leaders began protesting the new duties. In 67 and 68, John Dickinson, Pennsylvania, in his famous Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania, wrote that Parliament could regulate commerce, but argued that because duties were a form of taxation, they could not be levied on the colonies without the consent of the representative assemblies. Dickinson argued that the idea of no taxation without representation was an essential principle of English law. In 68, James Otis and Samuel Adams jointly wrote the Massachusetts Circular Letter and sent copies to every colonial legislator. It urged the various colonies to petition Parliament to repeal the Townsend Acts. British officials in Boston ordered the letter retracted, threatened to dissolve the legislature, and increase the number of British troops. Responding to the circular letter, the colonists again conducted boycotts of British goods. Merchants increased their smuggling activities to avoid the offensive Townsend duties. So what you understand here is you're getting John Dickinson, James Otis, Sam Adams. What they're doing is they're writing these letters to go ahead and protest the Townsend Acts, right? But the British Parliament ain't having any of it. One of the things that they go ahead and the colonists try with the boycott again. The merchants, they're also increasing their smuggling activities, right? Because they don't want to pay these heavy taxes, right? Repeal the Townsend Acts. Meanwhile, in London, there were another change in King's ministers. Lord Frederick North became the new prime minister. He urged Parliament to repeal the Townsend Act because the repeal of the Townsend Act ended the colonial boycott. And except for an incident in Boston, which is the Boston Massacre, there was a 3-year respite for political troubles as the colonies entered into a period of economic prosperity. However, Parliament retained a small tax on tea as a symbol of its right to tax the colonies. So the Boston Massacre. Most Bostonians resented the British troops who had quartered in the city to protect customs and officials and being attacked by the Sons of Liberty. On a snowy day in March 70, a crowd of colonists harassed the guards near the customs house. The guards fired in the crowd, killing 5 people, including African-American Crispus Attucks. At their trial for murder, the soldiers were defended by colonial lawyer John Adams and were acquitted. Adams' more radical cousin, Samuel Adams, angrily denounced the shooting as an incident, as a massacre used to inflame anti-British feeling. So you're getting kind of just a protest, I guess you could say a little bit of chaos. Eventually, it's leading to the British troops that are attacking and killing some of the colonists. Sam Adams is using this as an opportunity to say, hey, down with the British. They're using violence, right? So you're seeing this as a rise of tension. Renewal of conflict. Even during the relatively quiet years of 70 to 72, Sam Adams and a few other Americans kept alive the view that British officials were undermining colonial liberties. A principal device for spreading ideas was by means in the Committees of Correspondence initiated by Samuel Adams in 1772. Key word, you want to make sure you know that. In Boston and Massachusetts, Adams began the practice of organizing committees that would regularly exchange letters about suspicious or potential threatening British activities. The Virginia House of Burgesses took the concept a step further when it organized intercolonial committees in 1773. So what we're getting here with these committees is the committees of correspondence, right? This was by Samuel Adams. Um, they would just go ahead and they would organize and just start to organize just potential threatening. They would talk about activities that Great Britain were doing that were, of course, suppressing their rights, and they would also start to, in some ways, to organize some of these rebellions and some of these ways to stop these acts by Great Britain. The Gatsby Incident, very important. You want to know? The Gatsby Incident. One incident frequently discussed in the committee's letters was that of Gatsby, a British customs ship that had caught several smugglers. In 1762, it ran aground off the shore of Rhode Island, seizing the opportunity to destroy the hated vessel. A group of colonies disguised as American Indians ordered the British crew ashore and then set the fire to the ship. The British ordered a commission to investigate and bring guilty individuals to Britain for trial. So you're getting this trip. You're getting the Gatsby, which is a customs ship, and what they're doing is looking for smugglers. The colonists took that ship down. Yeah, so rising conflict. Committee's correspondence. They're responsible for it. Boston Tea Party. The colonists continued the refusal to buy British tea because the British insisted on the right to collect a tax. Hoping to help the British East India Company out of its financial problems, Britain passed a Tea Act in 1763, which made the price of the company's tea, even with the tax included, cheaper with that of smuggling Dutch tea. Many Americans refused to buy the cheaper tea to do so, would in effect recognize Parliament's right to tax the colonies. A ship of the East India Company's tea arrived in Boston Harbor, but there were no buyers. Before the royal government could arrange the tea ashore, a group of Bostonians disguised themselves as American Indians. All in all, what they're getting is you're getting colonists dumping British tea into Boston Harbor. Intolerable Acts. In Great Britain, news of the Boston Tea Party angered King, Lord North, and members of Parliament. In retaliation, the British government enacted a series of punitive attacks. These are called the Coercive Acts, together with separate act dealing with French Canada, which is the Quebec Act. The colonists were outraged by these various laws, and they were given the epithet the Intolerable Acts. So um, we'll talk about these acts separately because they work together. Right. So intolerable acts, you want to understand it's coercive and Quebec Acts together. So in 1774, there were 4 coercive acts that directed at maintaining the people of Boston, Massachusetts, bringing the distance under control. So they were pissed off about the Boston Tea Party. Guess what? This is what's going to happen to you, Boston, because of what you did. The port closed Boston Harbor, prohibiting trade in and out of the harbor. All right, because of the tea that was destroyed. That's a huge blow financially for the colonists. The Massachusetts Government Act reduced the power of the Massachusetts legislature while increasing the power of the royal governor. Hey, less power to the Assembly, more power to Great Britain. The Administration Justice Act allowed royal officials accused of crimes to be held in Britain colonies instead of in Great Britain instead of the colonies. All trials are going to go be in Great Britain instead of the colonies, and which is going to suck for the colonies, right? There's going to be that bias that exists. A fourth law expanded the Colonial Act. Yeah, these troops could live in your homes. So the second act is the Quebec Act. When it passed the Coercive Acts, the British government also passed a law organizing Canadian lands gained from France. This plan was accepted by most French Canadians, but also resented it by the colonies. So the French loved the Canadians, which were under British control, loved this. The United States, or the colonists, were like, that's not fair. The Quebec established Roman Catholicism as the official religion of Quebec, set up a government with a representative assembly, and extended Quebec's river to the boundary of the Ohio River. So the Canadians are getting more land, and they're also allowed a representative assembly, while in the colonies, Great Britain's taking that away. The colonists viewed the Quebec as a direct attack on the American colonies because it took away the lands that claimed along the Ohio River. They also feared that the British would attempt to enact similar laws in America to take away the representative government. The predominantly Protestant Americans also resented the recognition given to Catholicism. Philosophical foundations of the For Americans, especially those who were in great positions, leadership, there was a long tradition of royalty to the king in Great Britain. As the differences between them grew, many Americans tried to justify their changing relationships. As discussed in Chapter 3, particularly the writings of John Locke, had profound influence on the colonies. So the Enlightenment, they're talking about how the Enlightenment is going to have a lot of influence on the Revolution. The era of Enlightenment was at the peak into the 18th century. the years. Future leaders of the American Revolution, Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, Adams, were coming to maturity. Many Enlightenment thinkers in Europe were deists who believed that God had established natural laws in creating the universe, but the role of the divine intervention in human affairs was minimal. They believed in rationalism and trusted human reason to solve problems, right? Their political philosophy were derived from Locke and Rousseau. So just understand big picture that the Enlightenment is influencing a lot of the ideas, right? So I'm just going to go through here. I'm just going to go through this very vaguely because I went over that as I read through it. The end of the French and the end of the French and Indian War led to more taxation because this war had to be paid for and it had to be done by the, of course, by the one second, sorry, by the colonists. So actually, let's start here. Remember, you guys don't have to do the map, right? Empires at war. So the first three wars. I mean, these empires at war in the first three wars. Understands France, Spain, and also Great Britain. The first three wars they were happening mostly in Europe. However, the wars would then go ahead and expand into the colonists. And 7 Years' War. This is going into colonies in North America, and this is important because you're actually getting British troops that are being sent over there. The beginning of the war, not looking good for Great Britain. In fact, the Albany Plan of the Union, this is when the colonies go ahead and start to kind of organize. They attempt to organize, kind of just make an army, but it's a fail. They want to protect themselves against the French, but it's a fail because they are too cocky. They're jealous of each other. But this is important because it's going to go ahead and set the format and the precedent for them to meet in the future. The British win, but they win. But of course, they got to go ahead, and one of the things that they go ahead and do is they need to increase taxes in order to pay for the war, and they increase these taxes specifically in the colonies. The British feel that the colonists didn't hold up to their end of the bargain and that they fought poorly, right? The colonists, though, feel as if, hey, we fought very well for not necessarily having a trained militia. So we get getting these two opposing views that exist here. So the British Empire expands. It expands into westward. It also expands up to the north. But the issue that they're having is with Native Americans, right? Pontiac's Rebellion, Native Americans aren't happy with the British because the French traded more efficiently with them, meaning they gave them more gifts. And the British go ahead and keep expanding more and more westward into their lands. So they go ahead and rebel. But this rebellion is put down by the British militia, not the colonial militia. Proclamation 1763, what this it goes ahead and states that, hey, the land is west of the Appalachians, cannot be settled on. This is Native American land. The colonists hate this because they see that they fought in the 7 Years' War, right? New revenues and regulations, there's a whole bunch of them. First, we get the Proclamation 1763, went through that. Sugar Act, tax on luxury goods, tax on imports, right? This is not a direct tax. It's mostly taxes on merchants. Quartering Act, hey, British troops, because they're protecting you from Native Americans, they could live in your house and you got to feed them. Colonists hate this. Stamp Act, this is a direct tax. This is a stamp on newspapers, legal documents. The colonies hate this because now you're getting the people that are being directly taxed. This is repealed, and then the declaratory tax is what we get. And this is when Great Britain says, guess what? The Stamp Act was repealed, but we'll all still get tax whenever the heck we want. So it's basically saying, we'll take away this tax, but we own you. We're going to do whatever we want with you. Townsend Acts, Charles Townsend. I believe you're getting him as a royal, of course, a royal government official. He goes ahead and he establishes more tax on the people, then more tax on the merchants, and they're not necessarily, the colonists are going to be very unhappy with this because it leads to the Boston Massacre. So you're just getting more taxation. I'd say go back and look at Townsend Acts. I could have been more specific with that, but just for the sake of time, I want to give you the very big picture. Committees of correspondence know who they are. What they end up doing is they look at the ways in which the British are repressing the rights of the people. The Gatsby Incident is a perfect example of this. Gatsby was a customs ship, right, that would go ahead and persecute smugglers. And the Townsend Act, remember, that's what it does. It's basically saying, let me go back because now I remember, is that you're going to be punished for smuggling and also French and Spanish goods. And also what we could go ahead and do is, all we need is a writ of assistance. We don't need an order from a judge. We just go ahead and just take look for smuggled goods if you're a merchant. The Gatsby Incident, the colonists go ahead and basically blow up a British customs ship because that was persecuting a lot of the smugglers. Boston Tea Party, y'all know what that is. British tea thrown in Boston Harbor. The resolutions to that were the Intolerable Acts, which were the Coercive Acts and Quebec Act. It closes Boston Harbor. Colonists are pissed about that because that's their way of revenue. Also instills a Coordinating Act and makes the Navigation Acts just more and more enforced. Right, and we're also getting into the Quebec Act. This is beneficial for the Canadians that are under British control. You could have a representative government. Under the Coercive Acts, it dissolved, not dissolved, but limited the New York Assembly's, the Boston Assembly, the Massachusetts Assembly power. What the Quebec Act, they're saying is, hey, we're actually going to give the Canadians, even though they're under British Empire, we're going to give them more representative power, right? And they're also going to make Catholicism an official religion. Colonists hate Catholicism at this point, right? Yeah, very good. So and that's it. I mean, that's all of chapter 3. Let me know if you have questions.